We have all our admiration. I consider you one of the finest historians, Chinese historians, and foreign policy experts. You have all the academic credentials in the United States, in Europe, in China, a very solid economic background. And now you divide yourself between two different jobs, one at the International Graduate Institute in Geneva, and the other one, the Center for Security Studies based in Shanghai. Security studies associated with the Belt. I'm missing the name. Please help me now.
Belt and Road
Belt and
Initiative.
Road Initiative.
Right.
So you're quite unique. I mean, because you were, you speak English perfectly well. You were in a way westernized, but you remain a true Chinese with deep roots in China, and that makes you unique from my perspective, right? Your parents were both militants of the Communist Workers' Party and in the early ages of the Communist Workers' Party. You had quite an experience during the Cultural Revolution. You were in one of those re-education camps, so to speak, where
Right.
you made acquaintance to the current prime minister, and you were among the first students to be sent abroad by Deng Xiaoping. So you personally benefited from the normalization of China-U.S. Relations after Nixon and Kissinger. You did your PhD at the SAIS, the John Hopkins in Washington. So it's having said all that, let me stop here. And we have great expectation in relation to your talk today. Let me just finish by saying that you've just published a book. I haven't read it yet, but I'm eager to do that. The title is "The Quest for Legitimacy in China, or in the Chinese
in
political
Chinese
system."
politics. Yeah,
In
in Chinese
Chinese politics.
Right.
So, great pleasure to have you here. The floor is yours for about 25 minutes. One last thing, let me mention to all of you that you've met President Cardozo back in 2003, and Ruchi Cardozo, his late wife, when we were all of you visiting researchers at the Library of Congress in Washington, and President Cardozo sends his best wishes to you.
Okay.
Floor is yours.
Thank you, Sergio, again for inviting me. I'm very excited, for the third time at this wonderful institute, and I heard my dear friend Fernando Higgies is going to celebrate 90th birthdays, so I really congratulate. I miss Ruth Cardozo very much as well. I read your website. You had some celebration activities lately about Ruth. Okay, I apologize. I don't speak Portuguese, but I understood a little bit because I speak Italian. A little bit, not too much. But now today, the topic we are discussing, of course, it's a timely topic. It's a very important topic. My reading of the Portuguese here is you want me to talk about the potential of the new Cold War, or the question mark: will China, United States go into a new Cold War, and so on and so forth. I would start by saying that the concept of a new Cold War itself, at this particular stage, may even outdated because things happen so fast. Just the last few months, I began to worry. It's not so much whether or not we are going into a new Cold War. My real concern at this very moment is whether or not we might even have a hot one sometime in a month or so. I'm giving you a very specific timeline because it's directly related to U.S. election. Will there be some kind of limited military engagement between United States and China? Now, why I'm saying that, what evidence I have, or what is the problem? I think I would start with my first point. That is, the current situation is very, very dangerous because United States government, since Mr. Trump took over power, seems it's a deliberate effort to provoke, at least last year and a half, largely driven by domestic issues. Largely driven by domestic issues, they decide to redefine a external target for comprehensive engagement. Now, the approach of the Trump administration, it seems to me, is very, very risky. It's very dangerous because they seem to be quite determined at this moment, especially by the group who are working for Mr. Trump. It's not so much Trump himself. Trump himself has never been interested in ideological issues. So you cannot fight a real Cold War without set up an ideological background, right? The president actually, for the first 2 or almost 3 years, showed no real interest in ideology. But the president, on the other hand, eventually was won over by his chief lieutenants, led by Mr. Pompeo. Now, these are the group of people, seems to me, highly ideological, and they had developed a very clearly ideological-driven objective to engage China. So what we are seeing now is the Trump administration domestically is in trouble for reasons very simple. Trump wants to be war president. When he announced in March, that's his status engaging in the pandemic. Of course, he missed the opportunity because his mishandling of the pandemic, and the economy also not really doing that well. At this particular moment, the last few months, it seems to me, Mr. Trump China policy was hijacked already. I say hijacked, I'm talking about the real Cold Warriors who had a plan, who had ideology, who had a clear objective. The objective of Pompeo and his group is regime change. Okay? Nothing less than that, really. That's not Trump's original plan for engaging China with a trade war and the other economic encounter. So it's unfortunate we are in a very difficult situation at this moment because Trump is in real crisis. Trump administration in real crisis. So president and the Secretary of State are on the same page just for now. So it's very, very dangerous. Now, what is from the US side, I would say, 3 theories that sustain the idea of a new Cold War seems to me are not quite sustainable, even absurd. The 3 arguments, the main argument sustained Pompeo's. Now, the first argument is United States or the West in general should have nipped China's economic opening process in the bud at the very beginning. You see, that's the logic Mr. Pompeo, Mr. Pence, and the others, speeches they're making. They said we made a huge mistake for over 40 years to encourage Chinese embark on this road of economic development. That is absurd, in my view. Okay? This is a reading back into history. Unrealistic. Okay? They say it's basically they want to negate the entire history of U.S.-China relationship since Nixon-Kissinger time. Okay? Now that theory I don't think is sustainable, either by facts or by history, by historical logic. The second theory I found very dangerous. That is the theory says that Chinese Communist Party has no legitimacy to rule. Okay, now that is a typical Cold War ideological argument, denying, in other words, the ruling party. It admitted it is a one-party system, but basically saying this political party has no legitimacy to rule the population. Therefore, they only suppress the population. They haven't achieved anything except destroying people's life, which of course is not true either. Okay. China's economic reform since Deng Xiaoping time, at least, we all know, uplifted almost 30% of the population out of absolute poverty, and China's economic. Wait, sorry, can you hear me? Oh, sorry,
I can hear you loud and clear.
Okay, I just for some reason lost my video site. Okay, yeah, if you can hear me. I don't understand.
I'm not only hearing you, but I'm seeing you.
Oh, okay, that's all right, because I cannot see myself. Sorry for some reason. Now, the third point I want to dispute the U.S. position is it's that is the argument that China's opening up process the last 40 years only benefit China. At least this is what Trump and his lieutenants imply. Okay, China is the chief beneficiary, while others are only suffering. That logic I don't think make any sense either. Okay, that's one thing I don't agree with the Trump administration. The other point I want to emphasize is the strategy. Now, the Americans launched the Cold War. It's initiated by the United States, no question about it. It's a comprehensive one, both in national security, ideology, economic, even more deeper level than the Cold War with the Soviet Union. But I think there is a lack of overall strategy. It's not well thought out. We don't know what the United States really want, except they want a regime change. Okay, so that creates enormous strategic uncertainty. Could lead to miscalculations, on both sides, both China and the United States, because China is not really sure what the United States want to do. Okay? The original Cold War, if you recall, we have a strategy. The United States has a strategy called containment, which was a strategy very well thought of by Mr. George F. Kennan, who, as we all know, is the father of the Cold War. Okay, he created this theory. He has a theory. He had even strategic design for how the United States should engage the Cold War. Okay. But then we have the American administration. The last few months, they're talking about Cold War. Nothing came out of the U.S. administration as far as the overall long-term strategy is. Now that worries me as well. The only long view which American State Department offered is by policy planning staff, ex-policy planning staff director. The name is Karen Skinner, and she said that's a long-term view. Supposedly, this is a war between Western civilization and a non-Western, a non-Caucasian. It's a non-Caucasian culture. That kind of language is very, very dangerous. It's really, it's a direct rehash of what Samuel Huntington's original idea, of the clash of civilizations and so on. So we are talking about the war or the fight between civilizations. So there is very little compromise you can find in the end. Okay. which is very different from the containment strategy when George F. Kennan invented. This never exclude engagement, negotiations, deal making, and so on and so forth. Okay, so this is, I think, it's the reasons I'm worried about the American way of stumbling into this Cold War. Now, with the election crisis coming, are we going to see October surprise? Every election process, we witness October surprise. This year, my fear is that it could be some kind of excessive provocation in the military sense, probably over Taiwan question. Okay. Now, here I want to emphasize the framework, the original framework that stabilized U.S.-China relationship since Nixon-Kissinger time. It's known as a communique framework. This is based on three communiques, bilateral communiques between U.S. and China, starting with Nixon 72. That's the opening process. The Carter 79, which is establishing the official diplomatic relationship, and the most importantly, Ronald Reagan 82. Ronald Reagan's the last communique, stipulate it's a very comprehensive engagement between U.S.-China in terms of education, technology, and many other area cooperation, as well as the American promise that gradually reducing the arms sales to Taiwan and so on and so forth. Okay. Now it is the Pompeo and his group, it seems to me, the last few months deliberately try to escalate the tension between China and US over the Taiwan issue. We know the escalation of the official ranks visiting Taiwan, which is from China point of view, it's already crossing the red line. Pompeo himself may, there are speculation he may want to do it himself. That will, in my view, probably provoke some kind of military engagement. Or there is a possibility of military engagement or limited military engagement over South China Sea, which American also escalate on a massive scale, which Chinese also respond with a military exercises, very intensified. So the situation is very, very dangerous. Now, on China's side, I'm not saying China's side contribute nothing to this, okay? On China's side, my criticism or assessment is there are several things China should not have done or should control its behavior. One, of course, is the public abandoning of Deng Xiaoping's original advice, which Deng Xiaoping proposed, I believe, in 1989. Deng Xiaoping even provide a timeline. That's called, China should be low key, right? Should bide the time, should not provoke a geopolitical conflict with anybody, should not do expansion too much. Just keep a low profile. Never try to be leader of international affairs. And Deng Xiaoping even set a timeline, at least 50 years. Don't change this. You can say this is the last will of Deng Xiaoping. But apparently last 10 years or so, that legacy has been broken, okay, or say abandoned. There is a enormous, I would say, excessive overconfidence on the Chinese leadership side as well. With, of course, a very rapid economic development, the speed of China's economic development, it's the last few years, it's very impressive. It seems to me there is some hot-headed calculations that China's turn for leading the world, or at least to be a major leader of the world affairs, that time has already come. Now, I think it's premature. Okay, it's not well thought of strategy, which was, as you can see, the last couple of years also reflect in Chinese diplomatic behavior. The so-called wolf warrior diplomacy, that is kind of extremely assertive diplomatic attitude, posture, language even. Okay. So in that sense, I think it's not surprising China began to upset number one power in the world for obvious reason, but also even upset the Europeans and many other Western powers. Okay. So this is, I think, is one premature. I think it's a geostrategic miscalculation from my point of view. The second mistake, I think, is a overextension of Chinese power. Okay. Overextension means geopolitical or even geoeconomic overstretch. If you allow me to use Paul Kennedy's original argument, any great power, or superpower, if it's overstretch its capability, meaning you stretch your front, too many fronts, too thin, you become vulnerable. Okay. This, of course, was reflected by China's the last 10 years or so, the very fast speed of global reach in terms of economic activities, in terms of investment, in terms of infrastructure building. I would specifically point out, even though I'm doing this project, I do think this Belt and Road Initiative may have overstretched quite a bit. Okay, so it is, I think, of course, Chinese miscalculated in the sense they thought this is a purely economic project. But since this project had such a wide global reach, I always joke with Chinese policy people when we debate. Chinese say our project, Belt and Road, has no geopolitical objective. We never use that term. My criticism has always been, you may not like that term. You don't like geopolitics, but geopolitics always likes you in the end, which turned out to be true, right? So in that sense, I think China has reached the point that they have to reconsider their overall strategy. Now, at this pandemic, I'm not want to get into who is responsible. It's absurd simply saying it's a China virus. That language, I think, is absurd. But nevertheless, it came from China. China has some responsibility. China initially did. There is some kind of covering up, dealing with whistleblowers. They cannot deny that. But then Chinese have done a wonderful job in dealing with this. Now, at this moment, I do think China is beginning to hold some advantage even. Okay, so China is not really want to engage the United States in the new Cold War, not to mention a hot one. But the situation could easily out of control, especially next month or so. I'm not exaggerating to say that the Chinese military people I talked to lately, they are terribly worried as well. Okay. It's no longer something unthinkable to have an October surprise of a military engagement, limited one, even though, for Mr. Trump to re-establish a war presidency, maybe last-minute push for his desperate electoral campaign. Okay. So this is, I think, it's we are seeing a very tense situation at this moment. Okay. The last point I want to emphasize is that the post-pandemic situation it's going to be very crucial. My suggestion or my own proposal to the Chinese is this time let's not do wolf warrior stuff. In other words, you may be able to restart the economy earlier than everybody else, which they already restart. You may have done a good job in dealing with the pandemic. China probably at the forefront of developing a really working the vaccine. But China this time should not politicize all these advantage, okay? Especially the vaccine question. China, Russia, United States, three of them did not participate in the recent the international initiative on vaccines. I think it's a mistake. China should. United States, I don't see it will come. Russia developed their own stuff, but the Russian stuff is not quite credible. So Chinese vaccine could be more advanced and could be very credible. So it's a good time for China to show a universal value about this, saying, you know, we don't politicize vaccine, we don't politicize it, we are going to pursue multilateralism, true multilateralism, to help the world deal with this pandemic. That will help China set up its a better, or improve its image. Okay. Well, I think I'm reaching the time. No, have we?
You still have 3 minutes.
Okay. So my last point, I would, if you want me to say something about domestic politics, yes. There is another problem for China engaging the United States or engaging the West. That is domestic conditions. I do believe the last decade or so, the atmosphere at home has been tightened to the extent that does not help China's international image. Okay. There are a lot of things that should not have been done. I do believe at this stage that China's international, because China has already become a global power, you can no longer hide behind the walls, the Great Wall, saying domestic stuff is only my own stuff. Nobody can intervene, and try to permanently separate internal and external. For a true global power, China can no longer do so. Okay. So China has to take into consideration of global or international response to whatever is happening within Chinese border. Okay, either the minority issue, human rights issue, or the question of freedom of speech, the question of variety of other law and order issue. Okay. I don't have time to engage with you here on the Hong Kong question, which I have a particular opinion on this. I engaged in the debate on Hong Kong. Even Chris Patten was governor at that time. I was very critical of Chris Patten at that time, so I would not agree with the prevailing Western media's comment on what's happening in Hong Kong. Okay. I just put it very simply. I disagree with the main argument there. I criticize more the British legacy. Okay. So this is the picture I want to portray. And since I wrote this book on the China's legitimacy question, my view about Chinese regime is Chinese leadership is constantly in the moment of in the process of quest for legitimacy. Legitimacy in Chinese tradition, political tradition, is a dynamic concept. It's not a mechanical concept as in the West. Mechanical means you simply divide power in three ways, and you simply have regular elections. You automatically have legitimacy. That is the difference, I think, between Chinese traditional political philosophy and the Western democratic value. Personally, I don't think that the transplant Western political value onto Chinese system will automatically work. That probably will not. So what China needs to do, they should continue gradually reform their internal system to create a more relaxed political atmosphere. That will help China to redeem itself or to rebuild its international image in the future. Okay, I think I stop here. Yeah. Thank you
Lanxin,
very much.
thank you so much for this very thought-provoking presentation. Now, Ambassador Luis Augusto, you have the floor for 10 minutes. Let me tell, I already have thousands of questions here. Being sent by the people who are attending this conference. Guys, please slow down. There will be no time to convey all the questions. And all of them are very interesting. So please help me and slow down. Luis Augusto, the floor is yours.
Well, thank you very much. It's always quite a challenge to be able to comment on Professor Lanxin Xiang presentation, which was very interesting. I would start by referring to what we have nowadays in the U.S.-China relationship, is the fact that what we are watching is a change of the international order as we knew it from the end of World War II, with the consolidation of the U.S. position as the most powerful nation in the world. Then throughout the Cold War, which was won by the US and led to the disappearance of the Soviet Union, the reunification of Germany, and the reappearance of the United States as the only in a unipolar system during the 90s. This sort of situation has been affected by the events of the 9/11. The 9/11 made explicit the limits and the vulnerability of the world's most powerful nation. And then the emergency of China gave another characteristic of the situation of an international order in transition, and the emergence not only of China, but also of Asia as a continent important in this respect, and with the appearance of China as the most important Asian economy, the most important military power in the region. And I would also like to mention a few examples. We have in Asia a number of pending liabilities which were inherited from the Cold War, from the World War II. One was the Korean Peninsula, an unresolved issue so far. The other was the question of Taiwan, a former Japanese colony. The other is the very relationship between Japan and China, which involves also, for instance, a dispute of the Senkaku Diaoyu Islands and the South China Sea. If those issues are resolved by the Asians themselves, which are the participants, the direct participants in it, then the space for a U.S. military presence in Asia would disappear, which would totally modify what we are seeing today. But then coming back to what is the dispute between U.S. and China heading to a new Cold War or not, my first thinking was about what about the nature of the confrontation between China and the United States? Do they involve strategic challenges? Where core national interests are at stake, or it's just political challenges? For instance, U.S. elections, nationalism, the anti-corruption drive by Xi Jinping in China, which is the reforms he wants to make, and all the policies, for instance, China 2025 and all that. Of course, this was all modulated by the appearance of the pandemics, but the pandemics, it's not a game changer. It may be a game catalyst or catalyzer, but not a game changer, in my view. On the one hand, also there is the fact that as far as the U.S. elections are concerned, that Trump is trailing and a bogeyman to blame for instance, the China virus. And I understood with a certain apprehension that in October we run the risk of having something more hotter rather than a Cold War statement. This is indeed very concerning. Even in the Chinese, if Trump is trailing and needs a bogeyman to blame, even the Chinese side, Xi Jinping cannot tolerate showing weakness against the US. So, and its main priority, as far as I can perceive, is dominance in high tech and artificial intelligence. And that explains the hard line taken by the US as far as, for instance, the 5G technology and the limitation, the containment of Huawei, which apparently possesses the best technology in terms of 5G. I think that I have already mentioned it to Professor Lanxin, that what we have now, it's not a Cold War. At least it might be a limited Cold War in which I would call a technological Cold War. But of course, the two economies are sort of intertwined, are so interdependent on the industrial side, on the commodities market, that it's very difficult for them to decouple as something which has been mentioned very often lately. I would say that the United States and China, and I'm quoting a political scientist I read sometime in the past, they are a sort of a failed marriage where both are still cohabitating with the kids and no one can afford to pay for the divorce. So that seems to be the situation between China and the United States now. There are powerful domestic US economic players that wish to maintain good relations with China because they are the access to China market with a huge internal market is essential to their competitiveness and to even to their existence. So in this respect, a new Cold War would perhaps happen, would be a disastrous, would happen if one or either side is not able to manage its differences so far. Well, we have the other question is the US elections. What will happen if Trump wins, or what will happen if Biden wins? If Trump wins, we already know more or less. Maybe he will intensify its anti-China stance. But if Biden wins, it will not modify the structure or the content of the US position, but it would modify certainly the way they will deal with the Chinese to solve that. It will certainly senior level diplomatic negotiations try to try to push both bureaucracies to reach an agreement, because if we go to set theory, to the Venn diagrams, the intersection of the Chinese set and the US set is a huge market, is a huge place to be explored to the benefit of both and to the benefit of mankind, I would say. The question of legitimacy, I think Professor Lanxin said, the Asian concept of legitimacy is totally different from the Western concept of legitimacy. In the West, dissent is an essential element of democracy, of Western democracy. In the East, it's more a Confucian position, is the pursuit of harmony, which makes the legitimacy of the rulers, of the Eastern rulers. So it's a problem of reconciling an authoritarian political system based on state capitalist economy with a very efficient technology structure which links the two, the state capitalist economy and the authoritarian political system, and to what extent they can have a fruitful negotiation, or to say the word, to remember the word of Anatoly Dobrevin, a fruitful compromise of interests between China and the West, China and the United States, which I would expand to the West and Asia. So I really agree that there is a danger, which would be an accidental provocation mentioned by Lanxin. And the fact that this would be indeed a danger, but I think that would be perhaps too much, because both sides would have much to lose should even a limited Cold War become not a Cold War, but a hot war as such. So I see that U.S. and China, if we take a more strategic view, they have no alternative but to negotiate and to reach a common ground, although limited. What will happen, we don't know. I think neither Americans nor the Chinese know, but there will be a space for an understanding. There must be a space for an understanding, and certainly there will be easier understanding in some aspects, such as commodities, which is a globalized market, a very well globalized market, and it will not deglobalize in itself. In the industrial and sector, perhaps there will be I wouldn't say not a deglobalization, but a redrafting of the global value chains, which will be more limited given the impact on employment and the fact that labor is no longer a fundamental part of the process of production, given the technological advances in this respect. So there are a number of challenges to be faced by both sides, and opposing them will not help them in facing their own challenges. So this is my view. The fact that also historically speaking, there has, as I saw in the press recently, a certain concern in the U.S. given the fact that there was a perception that the Chinese Navy was now larger than the U.S. Navy, although not as powerful as the U.S. Navy. But in terms of number of ships and weapons, they are much larger than the sum of the Pacific Fleet of the U.S. plus all the other Asian nations which are allied of the United States. So this caused some concern. Speaking historically, we see that although the U.S. has parts of its navy spread all over the world, the Chinese is more or less confined to their own space in East Asia. So the South China Sea, along the coast of China, which is, if it is a cause of concern, it should be a cause of concern for the other Asian countries, not for the U.S. as such. So there is not a tradition, although it's Zhonghua is the empire of the Middle Empire. There's not a tradition of Chinese imperialism outside its own region. So therefore, the U.S. and the European powers, they were the ones which invented actually the imperialism in its modern fashion through colonialism. China, except for its region, including Mongolia, Tibet, Xinjiang, they never made any sort of extension of their power. They never tried to overstretch their power beyond the Asian region, and which leads me to the fact of the Belt and Road Initiative, which is, as Professor Lanxin said, an overstretching of China's power. and it's difficult to enforce. It's difficult to develop the Belt and Road Initiative unless there is a strong participation of other nations in that. But other nations, which are some are even part of the Belt and Road Initiative, they see it as some sort of Chinese Marshall Plan, which is not, I think, the case, at least in Chinese thought. So, therefore, those are the comments I have to make on Professor Lanxin Xiang, which was a very instructive for us, or for me in particular. I think that we have a number of dangers along the road, but ultimately, I think that common sense must prevail for both sides to step up the confrontation and to increase the risks of an accidental incident. It's a contradiction. It's an incident, not an accident. Would be bad for both the United States on the one side and from China on the other side. I would finally say something which has nothing to do with what we said. It's the negotiations between China and Japan. They were taking a very good path. They had never been so good in recent past. They were all affected by the pandemics. But anyway, the day China and Japan are able to reach a final peace, which technically they are not, this will pose a serious threat to U.S. presence in Asia, because it will be an alliance between now the second, in the near future, probably the first largest economy in the world, and the third one, which is the Japanese economy, a post-developed country. So therefore, there are a number of issues which have a common background, and the common background is that we are seeing a world in transition, and the 21st century will not be like the 20th century, in which we started with the British predominance, which was sliding towards the American predominance. And now what will happen in the 21st century, no one knows. I don't have a crystal ball, but certainly Asia will play a very powerful role in the new international order that will be the prevailing one during this century. It was all I had to say, and once again, I was deeply honored to be able to participate in this debate. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much for your comprehensive comments, Luis Augusto. Let's start the Q&A here. We have about 25 minutes to go. And as I said before, we have many questions here. I'll have to clusterize them around some unifying issues. And one of the clusters revolve around the issue of the election in the United States, whether Trump re-elected or Biden being elected will make a difference in terms of U.S.-China relations. They want to hear your perspective on this issue. Let me add one specific point of interest to this major topic, which is the issue of legitimacy. Because Lanxin, in all frankness, you have to acknowledge that there has been a tightening of the authoritarian grip inside China. Mm-hmm. The strongman regime, a one-man regime, very different from what China was 10 years, 12, 15 years ago. And the perspectives that Westerns had about China in those days of a slow, gradual, and secure liberalizing of the political regime. This has been proven wrong. And what we see now is strong repression of the Uyghur in northern parts of China, the Muslim minority. The case of Hong Kong, I would love to hear your views. I would not agree with them, but I want to hear them. So legitimacy is an issue, and as you have put it, the more powerful China becomes, the more important legitimacy, not only inside but abroad, becomes. So your thoughts about legitimacy in these two different scenarios: one Biden, one Trump, the other Trump.
Okay, yeah, I'm sure if Biden wins the election, things will change. Now, will that be a fundamental? No, I will say at least the danger of a Cold War, even a Cold War turning into a hot war, probably will be reduced dramatically, because these Biden's. You see, there is a bipartisan consensus now in Washington dealing with China with the tough measures. Historically, it's interesting because Republicans don't care about human rights, value issues, ideology. Think about it. Chinese always love to deal with the Republican administration, right? Since Nixon time, at least. They cannot deal with the Democrat. They can't deal with Carter. They can't deal with even Obama, because they are talking about human rights, all that kind of value issues. Now the situation seems to reverse. You see, it is the Democrats who urging the administration. Yes, we need to be tough on China, but let's be realistic. We're not going to do things which is totally unrealistic. Biden said more than once, I don't like a tariff, for example, because in modern time, in today's world, using tariff or for another matter is abusing sanctions. Whatever they want, they use the sanctions, because sanctions work only because U.S. dollars unique position, right? So, but that all is going to change. So it is ridiculous to rely on tariff and the sanctions to achieve whatever objective you want to have in this world. So this is at least Biden people or Biden team. They still stick to it. I actually, well, it's not public knowledge, but I think it's fine. I before the election, campaign, I invite top Biden advisors who are all on the team now, the major ones, to Beijing for a track to conversation with us. We want to know, the Democratic view on China. Very pragmatic, I must say. This particular administration, I assume Biden team and Biden himself is not going to be too ideological. So that will be very different one. I'm not worried about Trump himself, by the way. I'm always worried about the Trump team. These are the traditional Cold Warriors. If Trump re-elected, my hunch would be he will be totally relaxed. He may even reverse his China policy 180 degree. With his character, I would not be surprised. He will turn back to Xi Jinping's my best friend kind of line. And then he tried to squeeze more stuff from China economically. He is not interested in ideology. He is too, you see, the funny situation in Washington is you have a chief diplomat of the United States government who behaved like a chief propagandist today. Sorry to use that word, Mr. Goebbels. Look at the Pompeo is doing these days. He's not diplomat. Diplomat is supposed to be polite, making deals, doing things. No, he's doing all the propaganda today. Then he take advantage of an idiosyncratic president, erratic president, who will, he is willing to do anything to achieve his short-term objective. You see, this is what's the problem of the Trump administration. But that's my assessment. So I'm not entirely pessimistic about election results, but I'm worried about the next month or so when they are desperate. They want to seek something to provoke China, which Chinese probably will take the bait, unfortunately, on Taiwan, particularly on Taiwan issue. I would assume if Pompeo decide, you see, next week he is going to visit Japan, okay? If he is crazy enough, He said, I want to stop over Taiwan. Now, what if he did that next week? It's very, very difficult for me to believe Chinese will not do something militarily. Sorry to say, I'm not saying they're going to assassinate Mr. Pompeo. I'm saying they will do something to show, So it's very, very dangerous at this moment. Now, legitimacy question. Now, legitimate question. I totally agree with you.
Sorry to interrupt you, but
yes,
there
go
are
ahead.
questions here. There are questions here related to Taiwan. Do you see in the short term any danger of an escalation that might lead to the invasion of Taiwan by Chinese troops?
I would never say it's impossible. Chinese military is always ready of doing this. But the condition would be, the precondition is Taiwanese government publicly announced we are independent sovereign government.
All right, but not as a reaction to some kind of U.S. provocation.
No, the U.S. provocation of sending a high rank like a Secretary of State to officially visit Taiwan would probably provoke some kind of limited, you may say even limited military action. Remember, limited military action could sometimes turn into major escalation. We don't know. I mean, nobody knows, Think about Sarajevo. Think about all these historic events. Just accidental events could turn into something nobody can control. That worries me. That's what I'm saying, But if Taiwan declare independence, within less than 24 hours, Chinese has to invade. There is nothing. I don't even see a single alternative. I don't see alternative there.
All right. So coming back to the question on legitimacy, which is related to the issue of Taiwan.
Well, I mean, legitimacy is. Since I wrote the book, I don't want to elaborate too much theory here. I mean, you can read Economist magazine has a whole page of a review. Many other places. Basic point I want to make is that the Chinese concept of legitimacy, it's a organic, dynamic concept. It's not a mechanic because they are not focusing only on division of power. Okay, that's the whole point. Now, then, I do not say Chinese regime, even today, are not facing legitimacy crisis. They are facing legitimate crisis for a variety of reasons. One of the problem, which you mentioned, the domestic tightening up and so on control. Don't forget this anti-corruption campaign, the last 4 years. And Chinese economy developed so fast in the last few decades, which is record is remarkable. Nobody can. But don't forget there is a side effect that is widespread official corruption. I'm not even talking about the ordinary systematic corruption that has bring out the bad side of the system. It indicate now nobody dared. You have to give credit to Mr. Xi Jinping on that. He realized if we allow this continue, eventually Communist Party will lose legitimacy. Remember, legitimacy in Chinese tradition is entirely based on the concept of morality, whether or not rulers behave morally. Right? I'm talking about since Confucius' time. I don't think a communist can escape that logic. Since corruption is so damn rotten to the core at that moment when Xi Jinping came to power, nobody before him dared to tackle that issue. So it's just keep on going. And Xi Jinping had the guts to deal with it by rooting out. And you can say it's a very tight kind of method of terror, if you will. Think about how many generals he arrested. I'm not talking about civilian government officials. Hundreds, even military generals, the corrupt generals were arrested. And many of them even attempted coup d'etat because they want to protect their personal interests. There are at least, according to various sources, at least 2 or 3 attempts, at him, at his life. So tightening up, I'm not saying I agree or not agree. I'm basically saying perhaps is a political necessity. What I don't like is the tightening up the atmosphere, for speech and the other side of the story. So in that sense, the legitimacy issue in China does have a very different context. I will say the best interpreter of Asian value of legitimacy is a former Singapore leader, Mr. Lee Kuan Yew. He really elaborate very well. I don't think you can say Singapore is a democracy. Even today, it's probably not. But it's an enlightened authoritarian kind of system. Yes, I believe Ambassador has. Yes.
I've just found here one speech of Xi Jinping a couple of years ago.
Yeah.
It has to do with this question of legitimacy. He said at the time, judge China's rulers by their achievements, not their political system. So it was.
That's exactly the reflection of that traditional
when
view.
You compare, that ain't coming cheap. I don't plan to make it easier for you.
No, that's fine.
Yeah. Well, when you compare Singapore with China, you have to acknowledge, you have to reckon to the fact that you have rule of law in Singapore. You have courts. But you don't have such a thing in China, do you?
No, not true. No, I don't think it's correct to say China has no rule of law. It is incorrect to say.
It's much more discretionary style.
There is a lot of legal aspects were politicized. No question about that. No question about that. But don't forget, Singapore is a little city state. Okay, it's a British colony. It's like Hong Kong. They don't have a rule of law inherited from developed by themselves. They just took over the British system. Basically, it's a British legal system. They think it's very useful, even under a kind of authoritarian regime. Okay, it's working very well for that particular size. Remember, Aristotle used to say, democracy can never work in the big countries. Go back to read Aristotle. That's he said. Therefore, the Greek city-states, it works. Think about it.
Well, the modern democracies work in big countries.
Well, actually, it hasn't. That's the funny thing. Except the only example you can argue is the United States. But don't forget, the United States is unique. It's the immigrant country. They set up democracy at the very beginning. The American Constitution. If you read the Federalist Papers, James Madison and so on, it's to prevent the Civil War, really. American democracy, division power is built, driven by the purpose of preventing ethnic and the other fights. I'm not talking about minority. I'm talking about maybe Germans are going to have a war with the British, or the French. It's a very different type. United States is unique. Russian democracy never worked. Tell me another democracy actually worked as a big country, not even India, in my view, in the real original classic sense.
I mean, you're raising the bar too far. Germany is a big country. Spain is a big country. I mean,
not
but the
size.
question,
Not
the focus here is Hong Kong. Why such a tightening of the authoritarian grip in Hong Kong? Are the Chinese afraid of Hong Kong and
not really.
Kong dissidents spreading their word in continental China?
Yeah, let's go back to history once again. Now, the biggest lie today about Hong Kong situation is Hong Kong was a free place before the dreadful communists took over, right? 1997. That's the basic line of argument. It is the British government under Margaret Thatcher made huge mistake, even make a deal with the devil, right? That's, of course, most of the press today in the West are talking about, selling Hong Kong down the river to the communists. That's another line. No, but that's a lie. British had Hong Kong since 1842. It is Hong Kong residents who, since then, constantly fight the British. Remember, there's a colonial government there. Hong Kong never had a democracy. Hong Kong had is a rule of law, as you just mentioned, a British legal system, because there is no election. The governor is directly appointed by London until Chinese take over. Okay, so then the question is how Hong Kong actually worked in history. Hong Kong, remember, turned into an economic dynamo, very successful, right? Neoliberal economists in the West actually consider Hong Kong as a model. That Milton Friedman's favorite place, right? He'll say Hong Kong, that's the place I want. That's the prove everything's right of my theory. But why it worked? Because a unique political arrangement in Hong Kong under the British rule, which is a British genius, I would say. They did very well. They did well in India, but even better in Hong Kong. That is, it's called a tycoon politics. Okay? You have no democracy, but you have a colonial governor who runs Hong Kong, but the colonial governor is not ruling Hong Kong as an authoritarian figure. Now, so how Hong Kong worked, how the Hong Kong market economy was unleashed, because colonial governor is at the bottom of the power line, power rank. That's the old joke before Chinese take over. So who rules Hong Kong? Hong Kong's ruled by Jockey Club, which of course, the horse racing, Jockey Club, Hong Kong Shanghai Bank, HSBC, Jati Medicine, the old British taipans, and colonial governor. That's the original political. Now, what it says colonial governor only play a role as a coordinator among the big tycoons. As long as they can balance their interests, things fine. They don't care about the people at the bottom, okay? But then Hong Kong has no regulation. Hong Kong has no tax. The richest man in Hong Kong only pay 15% income tax. Can you say any place is better than that for capitalism? Chinese at the time negotiate with Margaret Thatcher. They want exactly the same thing, you see? That's why it's considered success negotiation at the time. One country, two, Chinese want to keep that pattern. Except colonial governor will be approved by Beijing instead of London. They continue to rely upon tycoon politics. The problem is Hong Kong itself is changing, new generation. Remember, who are making all these noise troubles last year? These are people who were born after takeover. These are the young kids who know nothing about colonial. He has no sense what the colonial history is. So they refuse to accept the old game, which Chinese inherited from the British. Okay, so Chinese don't know what to do. You see, the whole year Chinese didn't do anything. The things are basically out of control. The law and the order system collapsed in Hong Kong. This is the reason Chinese government this year decide to step in. Well, because there is no other alternative. What do you think China can do at this moment? If there is a democratic system, it's not Hong Kong people inherited British democracy. Then Chinese destroy it. Then Hong Kong residents have rights to say we want to restore that democracy. That's absurd. There is no democracy to begin with. See the logic? So yes, I agree with the argument that the Chinese elite who runs Hong Kong since 1997 also did not pay attention to grassroots people. You see? Therefore, they neglected what's the social change and the development. They neglect the younger generation's sentiment. This is a lesson they have to learn, but they need to bring back law and order. That is the national security law is all about. So I really don't agree with the British Chris Patten on this. He recently become a hero again. It's absurd. Yeah. On that, I don't agree.
All right, let's change subject so that we can cover.
Go ahead.
more ground here. We're gonna end up this conversation talking about Brazil. There are people here anxious to talk about. Well, Brazil be
Right.
in sandwiched by the two giants and how we
Right.
should deal with this situation.
Good.
But let me ask you about the Belt and Road Initiative.
Right.
You said at the beginning of your presentation that it was one example of Chinese overstretching in the recent years. How do you see this going forward against the backdrop of geopolitics in Asia, Central Asia, India, and in other countries?
Well, I think
Can
it's
it be
there
can
is
it be a
yeah.
source of destabilization of the region? Can
Well, not necessarily destabilization, because Chinese actually never really interested in other countries' domestic politics. That has been principle I think Chinese pretty much stick to, because it doesn't make sense for them to get into even a small country's internal, turmoil.
You're not interested in exporting your model? This is one of the questions here.
I don't think so. Yeah.
Asked by Juliano Trindade.
Chinese has no real model, really. They don't. There are some people talking about Chinese model. There is no real model to talk about. A model has to be a mature one, and it's already worked there. The structure of that model is very clearly defined. No, I really don't think so. Unless you want to export Chinese culture. Traditional culture, that's another thing. That's not our development model. Okay, so here I would say one thing that about the Belt and Road is that when I said overstretch, is that they miscalculated the geopolitical impact of that project. Okay, they at the very beginning, the policymakers actually considered. Remember, those countries are the countries or the areas are neglected by and large by the United States. Okay? Or at least the United States do not have a very powerful presence there. The United States never pay much attention to Africa until recently. America has not really serious investment even in Africa. Central Asia, United States do not have a real stake there, except the geopolitical, political side. Middle East, yes, they do have, but Middle East economy is a different one, energy. So here, Chinese thought they can sneak into those geographic areas to pursue this project without necessarily provoking a geopolitical setback. Okay, but that is naivete. As I already explained, I myself been arguing with Chinese all the time. Okay. Because you stretch so geographically, you stretch into so many territories. It will be ridiculous for Chinese to think you can avoid geopolitical challenges that was coming out of this. Now, then the question is, are you ready to take challenges? Okay. I also want to compare with, Ambassador talk about the colonial history, the difference between Chinese imperialism and the colonial history. Yes, that's true. Remember, infrastructure-led economic growth model is not even invented by China. It's invented by Europeans in 19th century. This is the period, the building frenzy. Remember the whole, railways, Germans embarked that railway, everywhere building railway, Americans Trans-Pacific, not to mention even Russians have a Trans-Siberian. Then, of course, canals, Panamas, Suez. But these projects in 19th century, behind the project, there is a colonial competition there, okay, clearly among the great powers. Now, the Chinese project, at least they thought, we pursued a similar project, but minus colonial ambition there. There is no colonialist tradition in Chinese history, which means you actually take a piece of land which is not connected with your own territory. It's not your origin. You overseas, right? You take over. That's what the British model, everybody else, Spanish model, Portuguese model in history. So they thought will not provoke the same kind of tension as in 19th century. At the time, of course, Lenin even sees that event they wrote this famous book, right, about the imperial high stage, specifically discussing that kind of expansion. So Chinese leaders, policymakers miscalculate. They did not see you expand so fast, so much money involved, and you basically doing it solo. Now, that's another criticism for me. My view is find partners. If you can find partners, Western partners, even better. We are having partners with Japan, which is a very big breakthrough. Ambassador mentioned China-Japan relations. One of the reasons China-Japan relations improved, which is it's the first major country, Western, or you can say, Japan calls itself a Western country anyway, to sign MOU, more than 50 MOUs on the joint project, Belt and Road Initiative. When you have a partner, especially from Europe or from Japan, they will help you to alleviate the fear that Chinese try to dominate the world. That kind of 19th century kind of seeking hegemony type of policy. But Chinese policymakers are not prepared. Psychologically, they prefer not to even deal with this. They bury their heads in the sand, if you will. My understanding is even our diplomatic missions were instructed at the beginning, never use that word, geopolitics. Geo and the politics has no relationship, which is ridiculous, of course. That's the problem. Yeah.
Well, one question before
Sure.
we get to Brazil, and when we get to Brazil, I would like to hear your opinion and the opinion of Ambassador Luiz Augusta.
Right.
And we haven't talked about Russia so far.
Yes.
Which is funny. How do you compare the current situation with the situation in the beginning of the 70s when the U.S. decided to normalize relations with the Chinese to undercut the influence of the Soviet Union?
Right.
Now we can see, in a way, it's the other way around. It's convergence between China and Russia, and to undercut the influence of the Americans in the world system?
Well, yes, Russia actually is a net beneficiary, right, of this conflict. There is no question about it. But the problem is that Russia was not taken, as very well. The Russians' position is very bad within the American political system, because 2016, the election and so on and so forth. So Putin would love to have Trump win. By the way, Chinese leaders probably until the last few months ago still consider let Trump win is better. But now they change mind. Chinese probably think no, better have Trump, have Biden. But Putin never wavered on the idea of helping Mr. Trump. Now, that's no question about it. Then you talk about is very interesting point. That's the Cold War Great Strategic Triangle question. Remember 1970s? It's called the Great Strategic. In that triangle, after Nixon breakthrough with China, United States sit in the middle, manipulating Moscow and Beijing. I always joke about it with the Russians. It's like you have two girlfriends, they are not talking to each other. So you have no problem. You can do anything. You just keep do whatever you do. Now, today, it's not, unfortunate for Russia. Russia is not in that position. So we have to wait and see what exactly Russia can benefit from this new triangular relationship. But Putin is not really he cannot take much advantage at this point. Yeah.
Very good. Finally, we get to Brazil, and I want your assessment and the assessment of Ambassador Luiz Augusto about how Brazil is seen from Beijing. Let me put it that way. I would like to hear from you, Lanxin, how Brazil is perceived in China. And the question to the ambassador is, how do you see how Brazil can deal with this situation of a growing conflict between China and the United States? Should Brazil take sides? Will Brazil have the room of maneuver not to take sides? What's your assessment in this regard? You go first, Lanxin.
Okay, yeah. Well, I think a Chinese perception of Brazil has always been good. I I hate to say I've never heard anything negative at the elite level. Popular level probably as well, but popular level they of course they always talk about the football, the other stuff. But I haven't seen real negative comment on even after Bolsonaro's. Now, Bolsonaro's is a surprise to Chinese as compared with previous leaders because during the campaign, he worries Chinese policy people or elite. The language he talked about, basically saying the previous government sold Brazil to China. We have to do something, seriously. It sounds like at that moment he wanted decoupling. His language is early decoupling, even before Trump talked about this kind of language. So Chinese were terribly worried because Brazil is officially designated as, I think, as anchor for Chinese interests in entire continental, the South America, region. So everything, as long as we can get along with Brazil, nothing will go wrong. Besides, of course, we still hope this BRICS project will continue, right? And Chinese investment in Brazil is always quite heavy, and they try to expand whenever they can. But it turns out, Bolsonaro turned out to be not as dogmatic to what he said during the campaign. He did not do decoupling the way Chinese prepare, psychologically. So he seemed to be quite reasonable in the end. But then, of course, we have this pandemic came. Everybody can compare, Bolsonaro with Trump, but what can you say? So I do not see the drastic change between China and Brazil in this economic relationship. Now, politically, I would be very happy to hear Ambassador's view. That worries me. I think Pompeo's recent visit to Brazil has been an issue that upset Chinese policymakers quite a lot, I must say, quite a lot, more than you may think.
Luis Augusto, the ball is in your court.
Yeah, I want to get rid of it. Well, I think that what I understand the question was how Brazil can do with the situation of growing opposition between US and China. Should we take sides or not? I think that the first comment about that sort of proposition is that we should not take sides at all because it's a confrontation. As we say in Brazil, it's a fight between big dogs, and we have nothing to do there. We must try to identify our national interest, how our national interest is better served with a position. And that brings about another question, another challenge that we have. We are not very good at strategies and trying to devise or to a policy as itself. And this is not a new phenomenon. I remember when I was in Beijing myself, there was a meeting between Brazilian and Chinese delegations. The vice president of Brazil and the vice president of China was the one of the Chinese, the commission, the high-level commission of Brazil-China. And I had the perception that the Chinese had a very clear perception of what they wanted from Brazil. And on our side, did we know what we wanted from China? The reply was no. We were sort of playing by ear in our relationship with China. Now we have a situation of a near confrontation between China and the US, and which is a very complex one. We cannot say that it will lead into a Cold War. That has been the subject of our of our meeting today. But I think the probabilities are that China and the United States will eventually reach a sort of agreement. So that's brings about another reason, or reinforces the reason why we should not take places. What we are not opting for China in a zero-sum game with our relationship with the United States. And by the way, during the Cold War with the Soviet Union, we had a zero-sum game. The gains from one side were losses from the other side. Now we don't have that yet, or I cannot perceive a zero-sum game between China and the US. Quite on the contrary.
But we have a decision to take about the adoption of the 5G technology, and we cannot procrastinate this decision.
We are postponing it for next year, and although there are technical reasons to say that, probably we are waiting for the next U.S. administration to come into power and to see what are the gains and losses. Choose one side or choose the other side. If we choose the Finnish or the Swedish technology or the Chinese technology.
All right. I think we have covered a lot of ground. Lanxin, thank you so much for your very enlightening. You put things blunt, which I think it's a quality. You're a sophisticated thinker, but you express, you speak your mind, and I like that very much. The points of agreement and disagreements, they become clear, and that's the way I think we can advance. And and first and foremost, has been a pleasure to see you again in good health. Stay safe.
Thank you.
When we get rid of this bloody virus, I hope to see you either here or there. In person.
Right. No, I'll be very happy and to give my best to Fernando Higgy again.
I will.
Congratulate him for his wonderful coming birthday. Yes.
All right. Luis Augusto, thank you so much for the partnership and for your comments, and thank you everybody. I think that was a very interesting conversation, and let's hold similar events again in the future.
Okay.
Bye. Stay safe. Abraço a todos. Tchau, Luis Augusto.
Obrigado.
Obrigado.
Wow, good. how do we say thank you in Chinese? In Mandarin?
谢谢.
All right. Very good. Bye.
Ciao.
Ciao.